Revelationary on Air with Brian Knapp and Dr. Chris Polk.
Hello, thank you for joining us. This is Brian Knapp and not Chris Bolt. That's what I normally say because Chris is normally right there, but for some reason he's not there. So we'll just get right on into it, and I will introduce our special guest, Dr. James White, who I've known for a very long time. In fact, I think I got into apologetics, and then within a couple years after that, I found you on the internet in your IRC chat room and started interacting with you there. And actually, I think the first debate I ever watched was a debate you did with a Mormon. I don't remember who it was, who the gentleman was. But I watched a William Lane Craig debate, and I watched a debate that you did. And
but you've never seen a debate between me and William Lane Craig because
no,
he won't do it.
No, yeah, I remember talking about that he was not willing to make that happen. So there's a lot of history here. Dr. White and I have met each other a number of times in person as he's traveled the globe and done a number of different conferences. I've had the opportunity. Oh, I should have brought that shot, some of those photos when I took headshots of you, where we had that special helper there, getting you to make silly faces. So, but I didn't. Oh, there's Chris.
Here, let me adjust. There you go. Okay, now this is the proper position. There you go.
All right.
Oh.
Hello, okay. Dr. White.
Hello. Now I'm surrounded. See, you guys should have been over on the same side together, but now I'm surrounded.
No, we got you in the middle.
This is how we do it.
That's right. Are we live now?
Yeah, we are. We just been sitting here chewing the fat, waiting for you. So.
Well, I'm my apologies to the audience. I had some last-minute pastor things come up, as they do, but it's good to be here with you, and good to have Dr. White with us for sure. So
good to be with you.
This man, I could crush this man on a bicycle, though.
Really?
No, I really could not. No, I wish I could barely get on my bicycle right now. So,
well, that's sad to hear, given how young
sad.
You are. But I will challenge you to step it up, despite your pastoral duties. I'm just about to hit 144,000 miles. I'm not sure if that's eschatologically significant. 144,000 is, I think, you could throw something in there, but I'm just about. I'm at 143.5, I think, as of this morning. So. I'm trying to get to 150, and who knows? I suppose it's marginally possible I might make 200 before I just have to give up on it, but I haven't given up yet.
Wow.
Very cool. Awesome. So Chris, why don't you, I know we came up with a few questions ahead of time of our own, and just wanted to toss them out here and give us a place to start. And then I think we're going to have some people in the audience that we're going to capture some questions from. If not, we will just do the whole thing ourselves.
Sure.
So,
one of the things I was talking to Brian about, I said, well, Dr. White's had the dividing line for decades now. And so any questions that you think you might want to ask Dr. White, he's usually already been asked them and answered them and that sort of thing. So I kind of want to look at this from, to begin with, kind of a more biographical angle. So how did things begin with you as far as apologetics are concerned, and maybe your work in Salt Lake City and the ministry as well?
Well, it all began for me when my parents met in Chicago. No, that's going back too far. Honestly, Elders Reed and Reese are the two Mormon missionaries who must take responsibility for Alpha Omega Ministries. Shortly after I married very young. In fact, my wife and I are going to have our 40th wedding anniversary, not this coming summer, but the summer thereafter.
Wow.
And so I was 19, she was 18. She's an identical twin. And two more missionaries decided she'd make a good Mormon. So they they stopped by her house, and she called me up and said, missionaries are coming back on such day. Would you like to come over and talk to them? We met on a Monday and a Thursday, about 3 hours each time. And in between those time, I read 2 or 3 books on Mormonism that I got at the local Christian bookstore. In hindsight, they weren't necessarily the best books on Mormonism, but I didn't know that at the time. But they at least gave me a good idea of what the issues were. And I was really, really challenged. I was raised in a Christian family and had memorized a fair amount of scripture at that point. But I was very quickly convicted that I did not know my faith well enough to defend it and communicate it to these men. I understood, we were about the same age, the missionaries. I mean, I understood that there was a language barrier between us, and that it was basically my fault that there was one. I was the one that needed to reach out to them. And so that started a months-long in-depth reading of everything I could get my hands on in Mormonism. I read all the Christian books, and then I decided, and it was scary, but I decided to go to the LDS bookstore because there are all these books that kept being referenced.
Yeah.
And so I need to get them. And so I started going to the LDS bookstore, starting to build up my LDS library. That led eventually to teaching a class at the large Southern Baptist church that I was a member of at that particular point in time. And really, most of the primary people who started Alpha Omega, there were only 4 of us, myself, my wife, and Mike Beliveau and his wife, Linda. We were the 4 founding members. But everybody else, Rich walked up and introduced himself to me. I'm not sure what year it was, but probably no later than 85, 86, somewhere around in there, at a Christian theology class I was teaching at the same church.
Okay.
So most of those key people came at that time period so long ago. And then people started asking questions about Jehovah's Witnesses and ran into some former witnesses. And so I started studying that as well. One of our folks was a former Roman Catholic, and I really did fight with him about that. But in the sense of, I just don't know how much we can really cover and do it well, but we started dealing with subject Roman Catholicism. And so it's just expanded from that point. As I said, the ministry was founded in August of 83, I think. So we are also coming up on our 40th anniversary for Alpha and Omega.
Okay.
And so I was a Bible student, double major, Bible and biology, minor in Greek at Grand Canyon. I added the minor in Greek because I started dealing with apologetics and realized immediately, wow, you really need to know the biblical languages. That it's just absolutely essential. And so I added that in. And interesting enough, did not take church history in Bible college. I did in seminary, and I'm glad, because my seminary church history teacher was just fantastic and instilled a love for the subject in me that I've not only been able to teach it, but hopefully been able to instill that in others for quite some time as well.
So you were just a few years out of high school then, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think our age is maybe about just 1 year apart. So
I was born in 62. So.
Okay. 64 here. Yeah. So yeah. Wow. So, I mean, what kind of prep did you have during your high school years and prior to that helped you, or gave you the fire, the desire to go do this?
Well, I mean, in 4th grade, I was passing out Jack Chick tracts on the playground. Okay. The irony of that is I've lived long enough for Jack Chick to identify me as the Antichrist. So
nice.
Talk about a bucket list right there.
Yeah.
But I was passing out Jack Chick tracts on the playground in 4th grade, and my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Gamble, evidently detested Christianity. And so she came in to the room one day after we were on playground, ripped a Christian picture I had taped to my desk off, though we were allowed to do it, and sent me to the principal. Now, I had never been to the principal. I was that guy, okay? In high school, I was never late for a class. I never got a demerit. I never got a B, okay? Yeah. I was the straight A guy and class valedictorian and all that stuff, junior high school and high school. So I was that guy. So I had never been sent to the principal before. And so I get sent to the principal, and I walk into his office, And I did the only thing that I knew to do. I just walked up to his desk and handed him a Jack Chick track. And which he informed me that I remember saying that I could do it, but I couldn't force anyone to take one. And I was one of the littlest guys in the class. I was thinking to myself, how could I force anyone to do anything? I couldn't figure out how to work. But right around that same time period, I remember I was 9 years old. My mom took me to her work. She was a receptionist at a place that did printing. And I wandered back into the printing area where there's these huge men and these huge machines. And I clearly remember getting into an argument with the pressmen over the existence of God at the age of 9.
Wow.
My mom went back and found me doing that. And part of me has sort of wondered about that over the years until now. I had my daughter Summer, and she did stuff like that. She loved going out to Mason, passing out tracts and stuff like that. And then now I have grandkids. And just about 3 weeks ago, Apologia Church did an outreach to a Mormon. The Mormons announced they were going to have some musical stuff on the front lawn of a ward chapel near the temple. Well, the funny thing is, there were more of us there than there were Mormons there. Okay, so that tells you how seriously Apologia takes Mormon outreach.
Yeah.
And my daughters and my grandson were there. And so my youngest granddaughter is 5, Janny. And so this Mormon's walking along and he's pushing a, little cart with his kids in it. And little Janny jumps out in front of him and says, "Are you a Mormon?" And he goes, "Yes." "Then this is for you." Now, how are you? That's the most effective tract distribution ever.
That's amazing.
But then later on, this guy's walking along and she jumps in front of him and says, "Are you a Mormon?" He says, "Yes, I am." She hands him the tract, says, "You have the wrong God."
Oh, wow.
She's not wrong.
No.
So yeah, it has passed down, I guess, through the years. But my sophomore year in high school, I was really not walking with the Lord. That spring, James Robeson came and preached at our church, and I didn't go, but I listened on the radio. And Lord used James Robeson to convict me, and I started carrying my Bible to church. I started memorizing scripture. I spent that whole summer just memorizing scripture. Mm-hmm. And so starting from my junior year and then senior year, I was a pretty bold witness in high school. And in fact, since I was class valedictorian, I found my notes to my actual valedictorian speech recently in an old box someplace. And I actually got to give a testimony of Christ. You wouldn't get to do that at a public high school anymore, but no. I did in 1981. And so I had been doing outreach at the Southern Baptist Church that I was a member of. So I had run into one Mormon. And the irony is, I think that was my junior year in high school. All I did that whole time we met with that, it was a mother of a guy who had visited, was argue 1 John 5:7. Mm-hmm. Little did I know what the background of the Comma Johannium was. But anyway, so no, I didn't really have much background when I ran into those two missionaries. So It was a crash course, but it's a crash course that resulted in, I've personally spoken with over 5,000 Mormon missionaries between Salt Lake City and Mesa, Arizona, and all over the place. So, yeah.
Well, I'm back. I don't know if you can actually hear me and see me well enough.
Yes. Yep. Yes. Well, we can hear you and see you before.
We're having major technical difficulties on my end, so I've pulled out the trusty phone, and we'll see how that works.
The battery's going to die soon, I'm sure.
Where are we on the questions, Brian?
So we were just yet? No, we were just we were talking over Dr. White's background and the fact that he started very soon out of high school, started AO Ministries. So yeah, I had seen some of your questions that you had posted. I think some of the next ones you wanted to talk about were the books he's written. So
yeah. Do you know how many you've written, Dr. White?
Written or contributed to 24. some of them aren't even in print anymore. Sadly, the two that I really enjoyed, that I co-authored with Kevin Johnson at Bethany House for kids, What's with the Mutant in the Microscope and What's with the Dude at the Door. Those were really good books, and I don't know why they didn't stay in print for very long. I guess youth stuff just has to be recycled all the time.
Right.
I guess. But yeah, I started off with a small publisher called Crown Publications, which had originally been founded to publish some books for Robert Morey. And so I wrote, everybody expected that my first book would be on Mormonism because that's what we did so intensely for so long. But it wasn't. I actually wrote a book called The Fatal Flaw. And the appendices to it got so big that we separated them out, made them their own book called Answers to Catholic Claims. So The Fatal Flaw and Answers to Catholic Claims were first, and we sent them off to Catholic Answers, and that's what then led to my first debate, August 16th, 1990, at a Catholic church in Long Beach, California. So we just recently celebrated 30 years of debates with that particular one against Jerry Matitix. And then the third book that I did with that group called Crown Publications was Letters to a Mormon Elder, which then caught the eye of the acquisitions editor at Bethany House. They picked it up and put out their own edition, and that led to, I think the next one was the King James Only Controversy, which is still my biggest selling book.
Been reprinted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. It's done well. Yes, that's the current edition there, right?
Keep that one handy. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one I wrote in '94. I wrote in about 4 months, and it was after I had my radio debate with Gail Ripplinger on the radio station.
Yep.
And if you've never heard that, we have it on Sermon Audio someplace. Yes, New Age Bible versions. Yes, that was one of those bucket list experiences too. I can assure you of that. But we had all these Christian bookstores contacting us, going, "Hey, we've just heard about the debate you did with Ripplinger. We've got people coming in all the time with this book, and could you send us your notes? Could you send us anything?" And so I put all my notes into a little booklet. My dad ran the print shop at that large Southern Baptist church, and so he printed up a bunch of them. And I was talking with my editor one day at Bethany House, and I was telling him about this, and he's like, "Sounds like a book there." I said, "Yeah, probably does." And man, did I immerse myself in that. And what most people don't know, the first edition, I typeset it. Bethany could not do the Greek and the Hebrew and the symbols and stuff like that. So Bethany bought me a 1,000 DPI laser printer, which in '94 was like $10,000.
Wow.
And I literally typeset the first edition of that book on Ventura Publisher myself. So I had to make all the edits. We sent manuscripts out to people, so I'd have to print out manuscripts. We sent them like J.I. Packer. And Packer, I don't know if you know this, but Packer read everything and tore everything up. I mean, I know, for example, you should never say a book that is entitled. No books are entitled. They're only titled.
They're titled.
You know how I know that? Because J.I. Packer caught that and ripped me for it. So, so I typeset that whole thing. So that was a labor of love. Let me tell you.
I bet.
To put that book out. I mean, the number of galleys and stuff that went back and forth. Whew, that was a lot of work.
So I'm curious if the KJ Only Controversy is your biggest seller. I mean, is it still selling a lot now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and primarily because it's used as a textbook all over the place. Well, some places, interestingly enough, I can think of one Southern Baptist professor at a school that dropped it and won't use it in his classes anymore because I'm not woke. But for people who actually want to have an accessible, understandable, interesting introduction to textual criticism, that's how it's functioned now since it came out in 1995.
Okay.
And it's still my best selling book.
I was about to say that there really aren't. I mean, of course, there's the Airman book, and there's another little introduction or two, but it's a really great introduction to textual criticism. I really enjoy that book, and I've enjoyed all of the books of yours that I have. I think that they're well written, and it's not just that. You don't find many books like those because they are a scholarly level, but they're written to the church. I mean, I can tell that they are written so people can use them on these very practical topics, right? Like The Forgotten Trinity is a great book, and the King James Only controversy, it's an entryway into some of these much deeper discussions, but you've done the homework on them. And so we're appreciative of that for sure. With your debates, so do you know how many debates you've had? And then I'm going to ask a follow-up one before you begin. Which is your favorite debate of all the debates you've ever done?
Yeah, people ask that a lot. Technically 175 moderated public debates of at least an hour and a half. Depends on how you count some of them. And now, obviously, if I do a debate in the new studio we put together for 3 hours, is that the same thing as a public debate? Yeah, I think so, as long as it has a thesis and it's moderated and stuff like that. So we'll probably count those. But yeah, I was cranking them out at the end of 2019. And then 2020 happened, and the whole world came to a screeching halt and everything got weird. So, but yeah, favorite one, yeah, that's really, really hard because there are some, for example, on Roman Catholicism, the debates with Mitch Pacwa as a group, there's 5 of them, are the best of those because Mitch Pacwa is just a really nice guy. He's extremely knowledgeable, but he doesn't play games. So they're very different than debating a number of other Roman Catholic apologists who are constantly playing games and pulling punches and misrepresenting things, stuff like that. So, some of those. Now, the debate I had with Father Peter Stravinskas, who has 2 or 3 PhDs from Ivy League schools, was probably one of the most enjoyable and entertaining and informational ones. It was on purgatory. Mm-hmm. And to see somebody who, obviously did not read a word I'd ever written before we debated. And I read everything he had ever written on purgatory or related subjects before we debated. If you want a real good example of what happens when one side is completely prepared and the other side spends most of his opening statement talking about Jimmy Swaggart, that's the one to watch. It was really, really amazing. But so I can look at like my Muslim debates, the debate that I did with Abdullah Kunda at the University of New South Wales in Sydney on the Incarnation. That's my favorite Muslim debate so far, even though the sound quality is not good. But as far as content, that's my favorite Muslim debate so far. So you can sort of look at each of the groups. Only done a few debates on oneness theology, so you can't really rate those types of things. And I'm not, as you know, certainly I've debated some atheists. But that's not my focus.
Right.
I think you have to have some sort of a passion to debate well with some of these groups. And atheism, that's never been my thing. Certainly the last debate that Jeff and I did with the 2 atheists in Salt Lake City was memorable, to put it kindly. Honestly, when he got that antifreeze out, I was wondering, is he going to throw this on us? Is he going to drink it himself and make himself a martyr to atheism? I had no earthly idea what was coming in that one, but
wow. I remember a debate. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he was with the Jesus Seminar.
John Dominic Crossan?
Yes.
Yeah,
when you were talking about some of the debates that you had done where the individuals were just very nice, I found listening to that such a stark contrast from many, not just the debates that you had done, but other people had done. It seemed like a fireside chat to me. And I was like, wow, this would just be a nice approach to use if both sides would do it. Right.
Yeah. Well, but the background of that is, well, first of all, Dom is just a really nice guy. And he's just a wee little Irishman that's spent the entire day of the 60s studying the Gospels in a cell as a monk,
Yeah.
And he honestly just didn't know that people like me existed. I mean, I was never someone like me. He never would have run into me in the monastery that he was at. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we met and I told him that I had read his autobiography and dialogued with him about some of the stuff in the book about his own life, changed everything. I mean,
Wow.
he was like, wow, I didn't expect that. That's amazing. And so he was very respectful. And you could tell, even though some of the stuff I was saying was like I was speaking Martian to him, you could tell he's just sitting there and he's really listening and he's trying to follow and understand, but he's struggling because when we did that debate, and then the next day we went on a cruise with Jim Renahan, and the other guy's name is escaping me right now. We were talking about names escaping us.
Yeah.
But we did a debate on the resurrection on a cruise ship up in Alaska. And like halfway through, the other side's like, well, wait a minute. So you think Jesus' tomb was empty because his physical body was raised up? I mean, literally, we were halfway through the debate before they're like, so like a miracle type thing happened?
Wow.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. Like,
Yeah.
wow. I mean, that's just how far removed they were from, well, at least he was, from having any understanding of what it was that we were talking about, that they really struggled. But yeah, that was one of my favorite debates too. John Dominic Crossan was, well, I've often said he was by far had the highest IQ of anyone that I've debated. I mean, but back then in those debates, like when I debated Bart Ehrman, when I debated John Dominic Crossan, I'd spend 6 months reading all their books, listening to their classes, listening to hours and hours and hours of lectures. And I can assure you, none of them spent 5 minutes listening to anything that I had ever said. So that gives you an advantage, honestly.
Yeah.
There are different worlds there, and I don't know that a lot of people realize that. I didn't go to some of the schools that you did, but I did go to a school where, by and large, the professors there were not at all believers, and the education there was not at all in line with a Christian approach to much of anything, even though some of them would have said it was, but it was a very different type of so-called Christianity, right? So it's interesting to see how people who have grown up in much more conservative theological backgrounds respond and react, or start going into some of these different realms of Christianity, so-called, not knowing exactly what's there. Once you've seen it, you know what to look for, right? As far as people using different hermeneutics that are going to lead them to a bad place theologically and that sort of thing. Of course, I agree with Christianity and liberalism. The premise of that book is that this is not Christianity we're talking about with liberal Christianity. And so you certainly get something like that in the case, I guess, of John Dominic Crossan or a John Shelby Spong and these folks. I know what you want to say about Spong. When you brought up J.C. Ryle, and he had never even heard of J.C. Ryle. It's just mind-blowing. We live in different realities in that regard.
Well, it's interesting. By the way, it was Marcus Borg was the other guy that went on the cruise with us and did the debate. And he was different because Borg was raised as a conservative Christian. So there's a difference between someone who literally is an apostate, as Borg was, and someone like Crossan that had just never even encountered. I mean, I was like a three-headed beast, an alien from another planet type thing. So there is a difference there. Spong, though, oh goodness, that was.
Well, what do you think? What do you think that the role of these, and I'm sure most of our listeners know this, but you spend as much time as you can with some of your debate opponents and everything. I've always heard good stories about how you treat your interlocutors and deal with them as human beings and this sort of thing. It's not like you're just out there to win the debate sort of thing. Of course, we want to win the debate. The alternative is bad. That's losing the debate, right? But you do treat them as human beings, and you always press the gospel home and those sorts of things. But how do you think that debate plays out, particularly in our postmodern context? You know, I enjoy debates. That's the way that I get to learn. I think it's kind of an entryway into the broader scholarly material on different topics and that sort of thing. Can you maybe comment on that a little bit? Because debates are kind of falling out of, they're not as popular as they once were. I don't guess. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, that's just it. Obviously, in the past, debate was a key element of education. Everybody engaged in it. I've pointed out that the Puritans in the late 17th century, at a certain point in your education in London, you had to be able to debate in Greek. Okay, I don't know anybody who can debate in Greek today, but you had to be able to debate in Greek, and that was early on in your education. So debate has been a very, very important element in education. Then it did begin falling out, but I have noticed that something frequently called debate is now becoming very prevalent on YouTube, where there are just entire channels where they'll have 3 different debates per week, and it's basically guys sitting in their basements with a fan going in the background, in their favorite Star Wars T-shirt, probably hoping that the camera's not on while they're eating the potato chips, having an argument.
Getting a little close to home here, Dr. White.
Well, I was just eating some Cheetos myself, so just not during the dividing line. And but where are the chips? That's what you were doing. You were just hungry, is what you were doing. Anyway, so it's become quote unquote popular, but they're not debates in the sense that the level of preparation is it's opinion versus opinion. There's very little in the way of factuality, very little in the way of understanding what the other side is saying. And so I'm a little concerned about that. And I certainly want to make sure that when we start doing more formal debates electronically, that we don't fall into that level of stuff. I mean, even in doing formal debates, I've had food fights. Okay. Right. And sometimes that's unavoidable. Sometimes because of who you allow somebody to talk you into debating, that just really shouldn't be debating. So like when I debated Nader Ahmed in Virginia, no one should ever debate Nader Ahmed. Nader
Was
Ahmed
he the evidence guy?
What?
Was he the evidence guy who kept asking for evidence?
I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but he was he's just not a clear thinker, shall we say? Okay, even the Muslims were getting upset with him in the debate that we did because it was just that bad. So you can't avoid those. It just seems like some of the stuff that's going on today inevitably produces it because it's just not being done on a very high quality level. So yeah, the whole idea of objective truth, of laws of logic, oh good grief, who's even thought of them anymore? I mean, if you've gotten a public education today, you don't think there are laws of logic. You're a subjectivist. Your entire epistemology is a hot mess. And so the idea, and of course, people look at the presidential debates as if they have something to do with debates,
Right?
Which of course they have nothing to do with an actual debate by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, when we actually do them, I think people look at them and go, wow, that's a lot of work went into that. So yeah, a lot of work did go into that. That's exactly right. And as well it should.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you on, I think you had a few questions as well.
Yeah. I'm curious to know your thoughts on scripture.
Wait a minute. Have you noticed that I'm the only one with flesh tone? You guys actually look like The Walking Dead. I'm just. Do you guys never see the sun?
This is a recurring problem with anything that I do on camera.
I'm just looking
Brian
at
has no excuse because, as you know, he does this professionally.
He does this professionally. Okay, but you'll notice he's got the light, making the gray in his hair look really cool looking and all that kind of stuff. But I actually look like I have blood in my body.
It's been a trying day. I'll leave it at that. So.
Okay, sorry.
Are you ready now for my question? Okay, cool. So what I was asking was, right now, Chris and I are involved in some discussions with other Christians about apologetic methodology, and of course, there was the Sproul and Bahnsen debate over methodology. And my question to you is, if you could share your thoughts on what Scripture has to say, if anything, about not necessarily about the specific arguments to use, but just the approach that we should be taking in general, and either tie it to well-known apologetic methods by name or don't. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I would highly recommend the conversation that took place between Greg and RC. Knew both men. I'm actually old enough to have known both men. And in fact, by the way, just in passing, if you've enjoyed the two debates that Greg Bahnsen did on homosexuality, he got to do them because of me. Most people don't know that. Greg was scheduled to debate Jerry Matitix in Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay.
And those debate opportunities on homosexuality came up, and Greg asked me to take his place in debating Jerry Matitix in Omaha, which Jerry was not happy about. I can assure you of that. But we did that, and that's why those debates with Bahnsen and on homosexuality exist. So we weren't like buddies, but he trusted me, and we had some correspondence back and forth, things like that. And if people have never listened to his sermon funeral, because as you know, he got to preach his own funeral, right? Have you heard it?
No.
Who's this, Bahnsen?
Greg had.
I heard his final sermon,
which was
that
was his funeral sermon, and
okay.
He had diabetes, and everybody had told him third open heart for someone with diabetes is almost unsurvivable, and so he pretty much knew that he wasn't going to make it. And so he preached his own funeral sermon the week before, and it's just amazing. You've got to listen to it. It was very, 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 very convicting. I think when it comes to the issue of apologetic methodology, I've certainly grown over the years in being introduced to conversations, for example, between Sproul and Bahnsen and things like that. And for me, the key issue, if you listen to the debate that I did with Dan Barker at the University of Illinois,
yep,
I forget what year that was, you have an idea of where I'm coming from. And what you capture from that is, I think it's very important when dealing with atheists specifically to not place them in the position where you are communicating to them the idea that they have the right to judge God's existence, that they have the right to sit in the judge's seat. You have to make your presentation in such a way that you are placing them in the dock, not God in the dock. And they're the ones that are on trial, not God. Mm-hmm. They don't have the right to determine whether they are created and whether therefore there is a creator. And obviously it's much easier for us to start with some supposed neutral ground that we all can stand on. But as I've taught my classes, I taught, believe it or not, I taught at a Southern Baptist seminary for years before a certain very well-known Southern Baptist picked up the phone and had me fired. But we won't get into that right now. He's been fired too. So hey. But
how the world turns in the SBC. But anyway,
but I taught apologetics for years, and what I would teach those classes is I would go into, for example, the amazing claim of Christianity. We literally are saying that the God who created this universe entered into his own creation. That's insanity from the world's perspective. You cannot back off from that. That's central to what the New Testament teaches. And so I would go through Colossians 1, I'd go through Colossians 2, I'd go through Romans 1 and deal with, this is the nature of the person that we're dealing with. They are suppressing truth. If you give them more truth, they'll just suppress all the harder. This is where we're going. I'd go through 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and fundamentally say, look, if Jesus created all things, then anything in this universe, he made it and he defined it. So where can I find this neutral place for me to stand? Because anything I'm standing on, Jesus made. He defined it. And if I pretend it's neutral and I keep this person going down a line toward orthodoxy, eventually they're going to come to the point of going, hey, wait a minute. If what you're telling me is true about Jesus, you were lying to me back at the start. And I can't do that, because that's exactly right. I would be. This idea that I can lay aside my presuppositions, they can lay aside their presuppositions, simply is not true and is not consistent with the message I'm trying to communicate to them.
Right.
And so when people ask me what are the biblical foundations for having, I think, a God-honoring and consistent apologetic methodology, you've got to start with who God is and who man is, because that's what the whole conversation is about. And if you can come up with a theology that allows you to have a God who did not define everything and a mankind that's not suppressing his own nature as being made in the imago Dei, in the image of God, tell me about it, but I've not found it. So you have to be faithful to those things from the start. And that's going to determine then how you end up approaching the issue of apologetics.
Okay. Yeah. The next question, which you've already answered, is does your theology affect your methodology? And it sounds like it.
Well, what kind of a question is that? Who has for the past 2.5 decades criticized William Lane Craig and had to say over and over and over again, your theology must determine your apologetics.
Yeah.
If your apologetics determines your theology, that's William Lane Craig.
Yeah.
That's backwards, and it's going to result in a train wreck. And right now, I'm sort of dealing with that train wreck again, because I'm going to have a dialogue with a Muslim fellow later in the week on Dividing Line, and his favorite person to quote in criticizing the Trinity is William Lane Craig. Wow. Because William Lane Craig is a Neo-Apollinarian, so he rejects Chalcedonian Christology, and of course, I'm the one that called Craig out. What was that, about 6 years ago, when he literally suggested Kerberos as an example, the three-headed dog of Greek mythology or Roman mythology, as an example of the Trinity. And I'm just like, okay, he denies original sin. He's a Molinist and he's a Neo-Apollinarian. Wow. Okay. All right. So yeah, I've been pounding the drum on theology must determine your apologetics for a very, very, very long time. Because and part of the reason for that is the reason to apologetics is to glorify God, speak his truth, and present the gospel. People who have an apologetic methodology that's inconsistent with the gospel they then preach are in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
They haven't obviously brought that process to its conclusion and actually led somebody through all that, because they don't see that they're contradicting themselves. That's not a good thing to do as a Christian.
Yeah. Let me just break in for those people who are watching right now on YouTube. Go ahead and start tossing some questions in the comments. If you'd like, just put the word question in front of it. There's a lot of comments. It'll just make it easier to pick them out. And back to what you said, Dr. White, it's like you've read my list of questions, because my last question was, what is the goal of apologetics, right? And it's, well, let me tell you what I think it is. I think it's ultimately to glorify God. Whether or not the person you are debating with or talking with comes to a knowledge of Christ or not, that is what we want. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That's we are a means that God uses to accomplish that. But I think so many people think that proving the existence of God is what it's all about, like from a philosophical perspective.
Right.
And what I've seen, at least, is people who will start with a philosophical approach and try and come up with arguments which are autonomous, unfortunately, or they're reasoning in that manner. And yeah, they can't start there and rationally, logically conclude with the God of the Bible, because they didn't start from the right foundation, from the right place.
Yeah, and of course, that's a specific use of the term apologetics there. We're talking primarily dealing with secularist atheists in that particular context. I'm thinking a lot about the fact that in my trying to get back out on the road, get into churches, get into smaller churches, do a lot of training of pastors and their best people, thinking a lot about the future, thinking a lot about if we're moving into a particularly difficult time for the church, what are people going to need? And I just remember back to 2007 when I was asked to go to a secret location to record half-hour video programs that were then translated into Farsi for satellite beaming into Iran on the subject of Islam. And the reason that was given to me to go through all this effort was that when you asked Iranian Christians, what can we in the West do for you? Constantly on the list was, we need apologetic material. We need to know how to respond to the culture around us that is constantly saying that we're wrong. We need to know how to ground our children and the next generations and things like that. Well, that struck me back then as something very important. Now here in the United States, I'm thinking about the exact same type of thing. And that is, if we're looking at an extended period of pressure, of literally secular totalitarianism suppressing the church, what should we be doing? Well, apologetics, for a lot of people, that's just something over here. It's not definitional. But if we're going to be in a situation where the predominant, vastly predominant worldview all around us is fundamentally opposed to the claims of Christ, and if anything, just look at the Equality Act put forward by the Biden regime. Look at the fact that the budget that regime just put forward takes out the Hyde Amendment, and hence governmental money being used for abortion and things like that. That's what we're looking at. And if anybody who's involved in education, if you don't see what's coming in regards to not only government funding in education, but to literally shutting any school down that will not do what this month is all about. It's June 1st. Aren't we all excited? It's Gay Pride Month, and it's all around us. That's what's coming. And so apologetics is central to that. I think now the fact that, and one thing I'm really thankful for, I hope my grandkids will always be able to look back on what Punkel did. That's what I'm called. I'll go ahead and say it. What Punkel did in his debates and in his books and things like that, that helped to ground them and prepare them to deal with the tremendous challenges and strains that are coming their direction. And so apologetics is going to, in Islam, dawah is called, apologetics is called dawah, and it's simply calling to Islam. And so that connection is something we need to see, because we have made apologetics something that's out there someplace. Paul said, I've been appointed unto the defense of the gospel. The defense of the gospel and proclamation of the gospel, you have to see that they are connected intimately together. And the more we are in a society that is fundamentally opposed to what we're saying, the more you're going to see how central these things really are to the proclamation of the gospel.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah.
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 One of the things that catches my attention, especially as a presuppositionalist, is there. There's a lot of people, whatever the issue of the month is, which you mentioned this month's issue. Last month it was something else. The level of emotion that people have when they say that we as Christians are wrong, or we approve of things that are just so terrible, and the level of energy that they have. It astounds me to no end that they can get this upset, this morally indignant, without having some sort of foundation underneath. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's one of the big challenges of Presup, is getting them to realize, hey, I get that you're upset about this. I get that you're very angry about whatever it is you're going on about. But what is that based upon? And in a world that's moving more and more in a postmodern direction, it's just, there's nothing there. And
no, there isn't anything there, and that's why the point of contact issue is so vitally important. What is the point of contact? And if the point of contact is the Imago Dei, then it doesn't matter who you're talking to. That is in there. I think it's one of the reasons the Biden regime wants another 4 years of public education. Is it probably takes 16 years to so disrupt and mar the image of God that you could start believing the stuff that these people want you to actually believe and act on.
Yeah,
it is just so far removed from anything that is meaningful to the creation that's around us. So that is the contact point, and they are made in the image of God, and that's also one of the reasons why you have to try to be respectful, but you also have to try to call them to recognize that. I'll just be honest. This is the level of immaturity in our society is just stunning to me. I mean, we are not only being led by children, but we are producing only children. You never get to grow up anymore. I mean, when you look at the insanity on the university campuses, where you need safe spaces and teddy bears, and you need to walk into classrooms banging on bells because someone's saying something that hurts you. It's hard for me not to see that as really judgment coming to fruition, because it is having real men and real women, adults, people who have some level of emotional maturity. That's a blessing. And man, I tell you, no society that doesn't have that is gonna last very long.
It has to be that, because you get this kind of idol of being nice, right? And that's inside of the church full on now, and it's certainly outside of the church. And so everybody's so focused on being so nice all the time. But the funny thing is, nobody's nice anymore. No, everybody's at one another, So. Yep. Yeah,
well, because kids can be really cruel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Chris, do you have anything more? We've got some questions here from those individuals who are viewing that I can go ahead and bring up, unless you've got something.
Yeah, let's go ahead to the question.
Okay. All right. Okay. Here's a really good one, I think, from Scott, having to do with, yeah. Thanks for that contribution, Scott.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I think it's just simply a matter of recognizing that all good men come out on top, and grass doesn't grow on a busy street, and that God only makes a certain number of heads that should be bald, and if God's called you to that, then He'll give you the grace to survive in that particular situation. So, yeah.
All right. Here's a serious one from Sentinel Apologetics. Since you have methodological problems with Craig's apologetics, on Twitter you also wrote Heiser's influence is a major negative. Are they considered evangelical in your eyes?
Well, I think Bill Craig definitely stretches the limits on that. I mean, his Neo-Apollinarianism really is not Christologically orthodox. The Kerberos thing was not Trinitarianly orthodox. Denying original sin is not soteriologically orthodox. So I That's pretty tough. Heiser is different. I honestly don't know everything about his theology at all. I can't really get a full beat on it. My big issues with Michael Heiser have primarily been in regards to his Counsel of the Gods stuff, and I think some serious misunderstanding of Psalm 82 and some level of hyper exaggeration of the influence of the intertestamental literature. And of course, the intertestamental literature is really important, but those people who seem to study just only that make it the most important thing on the planet. So, so I don't know where. I mean, Heiser I know is anti-reformed. Okay, well, there's lots of anti-reformed people, but I don't know where he stands on issues relating to, for example, Christology, doctrine of the Trinity, things like that. That comes out with Bill Craig and ends up in questions that are then being used against the Christian faith by Muslims and people like that. And I think that's where the difference is. I do see Muslims using some of Heiser's stuff in some other areas, but only that one area of what sounds like, I know it isn't, but what sounds like a compromise on monotheism. I know it's not technically, but it's confusing.
It's kind of the henotheistic, the way that it's been delivered to me. Yeah. So they're more than one God, but they're worshiping Yahweh as the true God or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so here's another one. What is your position? There's this claim going out there that presuppositionalist arguments don't demonstrate Christianity is true, or don't demonstrate specifically that certain aspects of Christianity are true. I suspect the person asking the question is talking more about the transcendental argument. But in general, I would say let's reframe it a little bit. What is the importance of having an argument that is if you're trying to support the claims that you're making, what is the importance of making sure that the argument you're presenting would end with Christianity as true?
Well, yeah, in looking at the question, it almost sounded like there was there's aspects of the Christian faith that are not specifically demonstrated by a transcendental argument or something along those lines. But the reality is, when you think about it, as Greg Bahnsen said in the debate with Stein, I'm not here to defend the existence of a God, just general theism. I find that to be incoherent. I'm presenting Trinitarian theism as found in Christianity specifically, and the whole basis of that is, if we've read Van Til, we know what his argumentation about that was, and you can get into all the discussions about Van Til and his Trinitarian conversations and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that I would say that you're laying the foundation, for example, for having a meaningful soteriology and the sovereignty of God, in the fact that it's triune God. If you don't have a triune God, you can't have incarnation. You can't have true revelation of God's purpose and character as you have in Christ. And we are saying to people that the central point of history is the cross and resurrection of Jesus. It's amazing. It's an amazing claim that we're making, but we are making that claim. And so you have to have the Trinity to have a God-man who can give his life and to take on the perfect human nature. So there's all sorts of stuff that goes together that's not necessarily the direct object of the argument, but it is very important to the final results of the argument and the consistency of what you're presenting. What you don't get from what you shouldn't get is sort of the piecemeal stuff that, again, from a non-presuppositional perspective, where you've got, well, Bill Craig, when he debates Shabir Ali, someone I've debated 5 times, I think, just throwing original sin under the bus and just saying, well, that's not really relevant to Christianity. And as a result, you end up with this presentation of Christianity that doesn't have a gospel to it.
Right.
That can't really speak to the key issues. I would just invite anybody, listen to that debate that Bill Craig did with Shabir Ali, where that issue came up. I don't remember when it was, but a number of years ago. And then go watch the debate I did with Shabir Ali in the Abu Bakr Siddiq Mosque in Erasmia, South Africa, where I'm standing in front of the Qibla, where the Imam leads the prayers. And the Muslims are seated on the floor right in front of me. And it's on the very same subject. And see how a biblical soteriology regarding man's deadness and sin was very important at that particular juncture to give a consistent presentation to the Muslims that were present. I'm glad that's out there. I'm glad I had that opportunity.
Yeah. So here's another one. Do the debates about the classical doctrine of God with regard to things like divine simplicity have an impact on apologetic method? The questioner's talking about frame, dolazal, elephant. Well, yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, again, the fellow I'm going to be dialoguing with on Thursday has, and this is really unusual. If you've dialogued with Muslims, you know how unusual this is. He actually brings up people who, well, guess who denies divine simplicity? William Lane Craig. That's just, he's quoting Craig denying the concept of divine simplicity. But at the same time, I've seen some presentations of simplicity that even I went, are you literally saying that God's omniscience is all his other attributes? I've heard some presentations that really left me wondering, can we even distinguish between the attributes of God? Because there is such a strong emphasis upon simplicity. Do the attributes of God even communicate anything to us in that context? I think we have to be a little bit careful. My understanding of at least historical simplicity was not that you could not have a meaningful discussion of the attributes of God, but that absolute monotheism denies the ability to divide the essence of God in any way and make it complex to where you can have parts that you can separate out and consider separately from the whole. You can't, I totally affirm, you cannot look at omniscience separately from the being that is Yahweh. But some folks, I almost get a little concerned, they would struggle to really meaningfully distinguish between Father, Son, and Spirit because of such a strong emphasis. So I think there needs to be some level of balance. Monotheism, without a question, is the foundational. There can be no compromise on that. But you still have to recognize that it was the Son who became incarnate, not the Father. And you have to recognize what the John chapter 17, the high priestly prayer, what does that mean? What does it mean that we are actually given the opportunity to hear one divine person who is incarnate saying to another divine person who is not incarnate, glorify me with the glory which I had with you before the world was? That's pretty big. That's pretty important. And I just want to, and don't want to get into it fully right now, but I also think Calvin raised an important issue in the reality that that the Son needs to be viewed as auto theos. That's where you get into some real arguments right now. Was Calvin a Trinitarian heretic? Right.
And I think he foresaw that if you did not confirm that the Son is auto theos, there would be forms of not Arianism full blown, but what we're seeing, for example, in modern times in regards to a submission, an inferiority in regards to the person of the Son that could flow from that. Doesn't necessarily have to, but could flow from that. So I'm not sure if that's what the question was about, but there's a lot being written on that subject right now, and everybody seems to have their own little flavor of ice cream when it comes to where they're putting the emphasis.
Yeah.
And let me put it
Just
this way.
quick-
I wish everybody who's raising those issues would go out and witness to some Muslims,
Mm.
and then some Jehovah's Witnesses, and then some Mormons, and then come back and go, okay, I've taken this out amongst some of the major world religions, and now I've got a little better idea of what I might need to be emphasizing as to make this coherent in speaking it to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really concerned that a lot of this conversation takes place. We're all just sitting around a table talking to each other.
Right.
And I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, you got to put it in practice, both pragmatically speaking. Primarily pragmatically speaking.
It's interesting in reading Cornelius Van Til, and I've been working on something with him with regard to what he calls the self-attesting Christ of Scripture. You know, he uses that phrase a lot, but he ties the self-attesting Christ of Scripture back to the issue of autotheos, which of course he's reading that in Calvin,
right?
And it's in parentheses if I remember correctly, but he actually believes that is significant as to the authority of Christ and the lordship of Christ over all things. And
I would agree. I would agree with that. If you're asking simply for me, and I have not had the time with everything else going on to be really tracking all of the really in-depth stuff that's being printed right now. Once it gets onto Audible, then I can listen to it. But to me, as a person who deals regularly and has for a number of decades dealt regularly with other world religions and some of the leading people representing those religions, that to me is a very key issue. That is one of those things that I'm worried that if you're just in the academy and you never get out and stand in a mosque someplace, that you can sort of lose what and people like Maximus and others, that come along with the rise of Islam. I think you see some of the things they're saying is because they are now always in an apologetic situation, whereas a lot of thinkers in the West, they're not.
Right.
So that's something to think of too.
Yeah. So here's another one from Scott. Scott says, it seems atheism, secularism, and liberalism are far more a threat to Christendom than Islam, Mormonism, and Catholicism. I think you might have talked a little bit about this earlier on, why you target or go in the direction of Islam, Mormonism, and Catholicism. Why so much focus there?
Well, I would see differences between liberalism and secularism. Those are different things you have to be dealing with, have to define them and things like that. But actually, when I teach, for example, on the reliability of the New Testament, I am preparing people to deal with all of those issues because that is a universal element. The Mormons are going to attack that. The Jehovah's Witnesses are going to attack that in a different way. The Muslims are going to attack that in a different way. And so you're covering all those bases. And to say you need to do this on the basis of what the greatest threat is. Well, yeah, I would say right now, totalitarian, communist, secularism is the greatest challenge that the church is facing. That doesn't make the Muslims in Saudi Arabia disappear. It doesn't make the Mormons in Utah disappear. It doesn't make the Jehovah's Witnesses staying at your door disappear.
Right.
You still have to reach the people that are in your sphere around you. And so it wasn't like at age 19, I sat back and said, well, I can see what's going to be happening 40 years from now, and so I'm going to focus on this. No, 2 more missionaries came to my sister-in-law's house, and so I wanted to reach out to the Mormons, and so that's what I studied. So to ask why put so much emphasis upon that, it's because it's what I've studied. It's because of where the Lord's led me. Am I dealing with the other issues too? Yeah, I am now. I've even been dragged into having to comment on Eastern Orthodoxy recently, thanks to Hank Hanegraaff. But still, like if someone says, well, talk to us a little bit about Hindu worldview. I just go, I've listened to hours and hours and hours of lectures on Hinduism and Buddhism. And it's like I've got a bad sector in my hard drive. It just doesn't stick. And I know what it is. I don't know enough of them to dialogue with them, to have the person there to fit it all together.
Yeah.
And that's one of the advantages I have in dealing with Islam is I've dialogued with a lot of Muslims, and that really, really helps you to get into the mindset and things like that. So that's really where the Lord puts you in a sense. You know, when I taught in Samara, Russia in, was it January of 19 or 18? Anyways, one of those two. It was 27 degrees below zero at one point. I do know that. And we're driving to the place where I'm going to be teaching, and our taxi driver is a Muslim medical student. And so I was able to have, through my translator, have a really meaningful conversation with him, because that's what the Lord prepared me to do. If he had been a Hindu, I wouldn't have had nearly as much of an opportunity to really communicate to him. So for me, put me in Arizona. There's lots of Mormons out here, and so that's just how it developed. It wasn't like I made that decision at all.
Yeah. So another question, more of an exegetical question. I want to ask if 1 Peter 3:15 refers to the reason that someone did come to faith, or a reasoned defense of the Christian faith, or maybe both.
How about none of them? I started preaching a sermon in 2005 at a Wretched conference back in Ohio. And in preparing to preach on 1 Peter 3:15, and you guys have probably heard this, I came to realize that as an apologist, I had been misusing 1 Peter 3:15 for my entire life. And I think most apologists do, to be perfectly honest with you, because it's the principal text that we refer to, because right there, pros apologion. Hey, wow, who's ever heard of that? But the reality was, when I was preparing the sermon, I realized that I had not looked at it in its context. And I'll do this as briefly as I can. It doesn't really make much sense briefly in a brief form, but fundamentally, when you look at the text carefully, Peter is quoting from Isaiah. And his quotation from Isaiah actually goes into 1 Peter 3:15. I think, the Nessie-Allen text actually goes ahead and italicizes a couple of words of 1 Peter 3:15. Most translations don't tell you this. But when it says, sanctify Christ as Lord, now, there's a textual variant there, by the way. The Textus Receptus does not have Christ as God. But sanctify Christ as kurios in your heart. That's a quotation from Isaiah. And so literally what it's saying is treat the Messiah as Yahweh, as holy in your heart. Because the quotation is to treat Yahweh as holy. But he puts in the Christ. Mm-hmm. And so the point is to recognize who the Messiah is. He is Yahweh. This is one of the texts that identifies Jesus as Yahweh. Most people don't even realize it, don't even see it, don't even use it that way. It identifies Jesus as Yahweh. And so if you sanctify him in that way, if you're setting him apart as holy, as you are his servant, he is the God-man who has come, that is going to so radically reorient all your priorities, your life, how you respond to everything, that you're going to respond to things very differently than the people around you. Because the other part about 1 Peter 3:15 that it always bothered me, is sort of in the back of my mind someplace, was giving a reason, prosapologion, to anyone who asks you a reason for the hope that's within you. Not that you trip them up on the sidewalk and you're holding them down and shoving Jack Chick tracts in their throat. So once I saw that, then I realized what Peter was really saying. If you are each day setting Christ as Yahweh apart, holy in your heart, that's going to change how you respond to everything. People are going to see that, and they're going to ask you, where did you get this hope that's within you? Mm-hmm. And you're to be ready to give a reason for that hope. That is a full-orbed presentation of who Christ is and what salvation is and how you've become his servant and how they can do the same thing.
Good. Yeah.
So,
very good.
Yeah.
I double checked you in my text here, and you were right. So
yeah, well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate your.
It doesn't surprise me any, Dr. White.
Only taught that subject for since
well,
you
know
were
I'm going to
about
call you
12.
out on it if you missed something there. So
Yeah.
All right, so let's take a question here from Rev Elation. That's so clever. If you could live in the early church before the gifts ceased, which would you have liked to manifest? Are there any ones that you think are cool?
I thought I was going to ask if I could have met, what church father I would like to have met.
You can answer that too. I'm curious about that.
I want to know who wrote the Epistle to Diognetus. If you've not read the Epistle to Diognetus, put it on your list to do before you go to bed tonight. There's nothing on TV worth watching that's better than the Epistle to Diognetus. It's probably the most unknown early writing, but it's available online, obviously. You can just put Epistle to Diognetus. It's awesome. And we don't know who wrote it because it's fragmentary. Sometimes he's called Mathetes, but as you know, that just simply means disciple. And I'd like to know who that was. I'd like to know what context they were in. I'd like to know where they learned how to give their arguments, because it's so relevant to us today. I just love it. As to let's talk about cessationism here for a second. There's two forms of it. I didn't know this until about 10 or 12 years ago myself, but I grew up thinking I was a cessationist until I discovered that there were some people who literally believe all the gifts that are discussed in Ephesians or Corinthians, all of them have ceased with the apostolic period. Discernment, preaching, everything. It's all. So I am not that kind of cessationist. I think the Holy Spirit's actually still involved in the church, but there are some that say, nope, they're all gone. That was just for the apostolic period. So I believe in the cessation of the apostolic sign gifts, which specifically verified the authority of the apostles to function as Jesus's representatives in the primitive church. And so if you're talking about those, I've never even given it a thought because I'm not an apostle and don't want to be one. They did a great job. God accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He gave us the scriptures, and their apostolic authority was recognized. Maybe, in that context, I think it's really important that people do take the time to come to understand what was the greatest threat to the early church. The greatest threat to the early church. Valentinian Gnosticism. Wow. Talk about I really have come to believe that Paul was prophetically warning about Valentinian Gnosticism, because when you look at it, when you find out what it was really about, and we know more about it today than we ever had before because of the Nag Hammadi codices and things like that. Irenaeus had done a good job, but we now know more. It was purposefully designed to look as much like Christianity as possible while completely and fundamentally changing its foundations. Wow. Joseph Smith was an amateur in comparison to Valentinus. That he really was. And so early church is a fascinating period of time. It really, really, really is. I think we need to spend more time looking at it than we do, and recognizing the connection we should still have with those early believers. But let's be honest with this, most modern day Christians that was a completely different time. They don't even feel any connection to that early period, which
That's
I think
right.
is a shame. I think it's a shame.
Yeah. Another one from Scott, a little more practical, I think. Tips for strapping young apologists who want to teach themselves Greek at home without paying for academic structure. First of all, do you want to do that? And if so,
well, I want to know a strapping young apologist.
Yeah,
Is this a guy who wants to do his memorization of his vocabulary while lifting weights? I'm not really sure exactly what that's all about. But same answer I've given for years and years and years. And some of you guys I'm not sure if you guys were in channel long enough ago, back in the early 2000s-ish, maybe late 90s, because I started the channel in 96. We had a guy who wanted to go to master's seminary and do 2 masters in the time it only takes to do 1. So he asked me, how can I get Greek out of the way so I can test out of Greek? And he was one of the few people that actually did it. But I told him to get Mounce's stuff, and I told him what he was going to have to do and how he could approach it. And he was disciplined, and he did it. And he tested out of Greek, and he did it. He did 2 master's degrees in the time it takes to do 1 before going out to Trinity and getting his PhD.
Wow.
So it can be done. Bill Mounce has put together right there, Basics of Biblical Greek. So he's got the textbook, the workbook, parsing programs, computer programs, has had them all along. His lectures are online. When I've taught online a number of times. I've always used Mounce. He's encouraging. I learned William Hersey Davis, which is like as exciting as chewing on aluminum foil. You really had to be dedicated to do that. But still, even with all that, the vast majority of guys that try it fail. And they fail for 2 reasons. A, it is a matter of self-discipline and time management, normally with a family. Really hard to do. Really, really hard to do. Secondly, they're learning 2 languages at the same time. Mm-hmm. That is, they don't know English.
Yeah.
And so learning 1 language at one time is a challenge. Learning 2 languages at the same time normally is a recipe for failure. So when I would be teaching a Greek class or something, I'd say, hey, if you've got a couple months before it starts, what you need to be doing is you need to be learning English grammar, which very few people actually know. Mm-hmm. And because that's what the discussions are going to be in. They're going to be in your own language, and you need to know those things.
Right.
So it can be done. I've seen people do it, but discipline is tough.
Yes,
indeed it is. All right. So I think we've gone through all the questions we've got. Chris, you got anything you want to share as we close out?
I don't think so. Thank you so much for coming on with us. Is it tomorrow night, Lord willing, Brian?
Yep.
Colin Samuel. We're going to talk about aliens. And
yes.
Yes. You know that's a popular topic now as well. I don't think that Brian is completely sold on this one yet, but
I just don't know enough about it. That's all.
I think a lot of us are rushing to catch up. I've got some stuff on my list that my fellow pastors at Apologia, we've all said, yeah, we need to have a statement ready for when all this stuff hits, and we're all going to be dealing with it. And there's a lot of stuff out there.
Absolutely.
I've still got some healthy skepticism myself about a number of aspects of these things. So yeah, we'll that'll be interesting. I'll have to listen in on that as well.
Yeah.
On one of my long rides, because that's the only time I have to.
That topic reminds me of something that you said, I believe, one time about Jehovah's Witnesses and then Mormonism. The difference between them, the Jehovah's Witnesses, you go deep, into it, whereas with Mormonism, it's kind of lightweight, but it's lots of different problems, right?
It's very wide, but you don't have to go all that deep. Jehovah's Witnesses, very narrow, but you have to go very deep, right?
So this topic of the paranormal, it's not like it takes a lot of critical thought, to think through how are we going to address this, but there is a lot of material out there on that sort of topic. So
there is, yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, thank you again for fitting us in, Dr. White. It's been great to catch up and have the 3 of us here together to talk through these things. Don't forget, those of you who are watching, to subscribe, to click the bell so you get notifications for our upcoming discussions on aliens and whatever else we might come up with. Thanks again.